Almost 2 years ago, I made one of the biggest decisions in my life, and that was to move to the US and leave Europe behind and start a new life. I sold all my things, bought a flight, and then I arrived in the US and started my new life. And now it's been 2 years, and I'm gonna share my opinions, how I see the US versus Europe after these 2 years of living here. I'm gonna talk about the good things, the bad things, how I see Europe today, things that surprised me in the US, and a lot of other things that I'm gonna cover here. And remember, it's just my opinions as a Danish person. Before we get into the video, can you do me a big favor and hit the subscribe and like button? That would help me a lot make more videos like this. For so many years, my dream was to move to the US, but it was always complicated. It was difficult with the visas. I had my life in Denmark, I had my companies in Denmark, and I was like completely attached to Denmark. And for that reason, it was always difficult. But when I turned 30 years old, I felt now is the time, no more excuses. I started the visa process, and after more than 1 year of wait and paperwork, I finally got the visa and booked my flights and started a new life. That was my motivation to move to the US as an entrepreneur and try to make it as cheesy as it sounds. Before moving here, I had traveled a lot in the US, and I have friends that is American, so of course, there's a lot of things that it was not really a surprise, but I'm still gonna mention some of the things here in the video just to give you the full insight of how I see the US versus Europe. And the first thing I want to talk about is work. So in the US, generally speaking, people work more, and a lot of things is centered around work, where in Europe it is a little different. In Europe it is more you have your work, but that is more just to have some money and live the life, but it's not going to be the centerpiece of your life. And here I feel it is a little different in the US. It does take more of your time. As an example with me, a lot of the people that I met in LA is people who came to LA because they had a dream, and because it's expensive and difficult and they really try to make it, they have 2 or even 3 jobs and they work almost every day. And this is very different from a lot of people in Europe, where maybe you work 37 hours a week and you have plenty of time to do different hobbies and other things you like. So this dynamic is completely different. And I think there's some good things both in the US and Europe. One of the reasons why the US have been so successful is because there is that drive. There is that drive to build things, be successful. And that's why there's so many big companies that is successful. It is really an entrepreneur country, where the ones that fight the most is also going to be the ones who's gonna have a lot of success. Where in Europe, it is more focused on you grow up, you have a good education, you take a safe job, and then you have your 5-6 weeks of holidays. So this whole way of thinking is very different. But of course, there's some pros and cons from this, because I think there's also a lot of people in the US would prefer a life similar to the one in Europe, because it is an easier life in Europe in many ways, because maybe you work 40 hours a week and you have 5-6 weeks of holidays. A lot of things are covered for your education and healthcare and things like that. If you're a person that just want a safe, stable life, then Europe is a better place. And that was also my feeling before moving, but definitely something I also see today. On the other hand, the entrepreneur spirit, the working hard and all, is still stronger in the US. And it is, in my opinion, still the best place to go if you want to start a business, or you're the best in whatever niche thing it is. Then that is the best place in the world still. Of course, it will be tough, it will be difficult, but the sky is the limit still in the US, where if you are from a country like Denmark, it is a very small market. You have 6 million people, and then if you are with the other Scandinavian countries, then you are 20 million people. This is 3 countries and you're only at 20 million people. So this also means that you don't have the same opportunities to grow fast, to build businesses. It will stay small, both because of the society is built, but also because, again, the market is so much smaller. So my overall conclusion, and of course, it's difficult to conclude over 50 countries that is in Europe, but if I should say something general, people have a little more slow, easy life, on their work less, which is a great thing. But on the other hand, if you really want to make a big difference in the world and you have some dreams, and the whole American dream, and that still exists, I still believe that exists, then still that entrepreneur spirit is stronger in the US. You can't find that in Europe, and that is really where the two things separate, where you find the pros and cons, in my opinion. If you're thinking to make the move to the US, I would recommend you using Deal for this. I used Deal 2 years ago for my visa, and you can do the same thing. I've added a link here in the description directly where you can schedule a call and have a talk with them. It's just a 20-30 minute talk with them, and then they can help you, guide you, whether it is a visa to the US or somewhere else. So check that out if you are thinking to actually do something about your dreams of moving to a new country. The next thing is money. And when I say money, it's more that I really got to see over these last 2 years how much money there really is in the US. And I know I speak very general in this video because most of my time have been in LA, so that's mostly where I base these things from. But you can see there's so much money, and when you talk with people and they talk about how much money they make, it is very common that people make $200,000 or $300,000 or $400,000 a year, which is very uncommon in a country like Denmark, where most people maybe would make between $50,000 and $100,000, something like that. That would be, if you would meet someone, then most people would be in this level more or less. So in general, you can just see there's so much money, so much richness or wealth still in the US, even though on the next street there might be a lot of homeless people. So really, you really see how much money there still is in the US. And I think it's a really positive thing, because a lot of people say the American dream is not there anymore and things have changed and it's too difficult and all. And it's true. I think it is very difficult, and I think also that the society is structured in a way that is not the best, that there's a lot of homeless people and a lot of people with no money and struggling. But it also tells me that there is a lot of opportunities to make a lot of money, to get investments, because there is people that take more risk and they're willing to invest and take those chances in the US. So I think that's really a good thing, that if you come to the US, that then you see there is a lot of money around the corner ready to be invested, and something you can go for also. This is a little different in Europe, where in general, if your salary is in Europe, it will be lower. Like in Scandinavia, it is higher. In Denmark and Sweden and Norway, it is higher salaries. But if you live in Germany or Italy or whatever, it will be, maybe you will make $3,000 a month if you have a good job there. And this, of course, I don't have the exact numbers right here, but in general, it is a lot lower salaries. That is also something to count into all of this, that in general, the salaries in Europe is much lower in many of these countries. So that is really something also that I think is interesting to point out. The next thing is that Europe feels like a fairy tale when you go back as a tourist. So most of my life I lived in Europe, and when you live your daily life in Europe, you get used to seeing all these old beautiful buildings and just be surrounded in this. This is like the normal life, and you don't really think much about it. But when you spend most of your time in a city where the architecture is not that pretty, there's not that same history and soul, you really get to appreciate those moments where you go back. You really feel like you walk in a fairy tale, and it's really beautiful. And that's something really, after spending 2 years in the US, that I feel really that this is something that is so much better in Europe. You really feel like you walk in a fairy tale. There's so much history, so much culture, and for sure something that the US doesn't have, because the US is so young. You just feel sometimes maybe you miss a bit this deeper culture, this deeper history. And I'm not a person that is super much into these things, but I can still feel that, something I appreciate, this history and this deeper culture that you don't get in the US. One of the things that always fascinated me and that I really liked about the US before moving was the whole idea of the mix of the cultures, that you had people from, for example, in LA, you have some people that is from Europe, you have a lot of Mexicans, you have a lot of Native Americans, and so many other cultures, also a lot of Asian people. All of this mixed together, and also a lot of these people moved there because they had some dream. And I think this whole concept was so interesting and so inspiring for me, because I was also tired of living my life in Denmark, where 90% is looking like me, talking about the same things, and I felt this lack of inspiration. And I always felt that when I would meet people in Denmark that was foreigners, that it would feel like that is the foreigner and not just like this mix of cultures. So it always felt, okay, there's the Danish and then there's the foreigners. I was tired of this kind of structure of the immigration or whatever. And that's something I really appreciate in the US, that you just see all these different cultures mixed together, and a completely different dynamic than you see from most European countries. Of course, some European countries have more mix of different cultures, but in general it is a different dynamic you see. Another thing that is very different is that in the US I feel you have more freedom. And of course this is very general speaking, because there's also a lot of stupid rules and things that is over-regulated in the US for sure. But what I mean with this is that you are more on your own, you have more control, but on the other hand the US is not going to help you that much. And what I mean with all of this is that in Europe, or let's say with Denmark, my home country, everything is very controlled. They know, the government knows everything about you. Everything is like kind of synchronized together. All taxes, if you don't pay your taxes, maybe they take your car, because all of that is all synced together. And like they know so many things about you. But of course this can both be convenient. It can be good that you can see your health profile or whatever, and your taxes and all that is put together. But on the other hand, it feels like it's also a bit too much control sometimes. And where in the US you are more on your own. You have your social security number and your credit card, and then figure out the rest more or less. So it's a very different way the society works. And personally, I prefer more that you have this more freedom to make those decisions. You make more of these decisions on your own. You have more responsibility yourself. Of course, a lot of people, it's too much responsibility, and for that reason they get into trouble. So of course, I don't know if generally speaking this is the best thing. Maybe not. Maybe it's better the way it works in Denmark, but for me personally, I like more that you're on your own and you figure out things yourself. I prefer that I can make the decisions myself. I can buy a car and it's not taxed to the roof because the government wants you to take the public transportation. Things like that, where I feel, of course, there is some regulation in the US, but it's not in the same way. This is something where I feel, okay, you have this balance between, yeah, you have more freedom in the US to make your decisions, but you also have more responsibility, where in Denmark, as an example, you will not have as much control, but it's also going to help you if you're in trouble. So it's like this balance of what you prefer. But for me, I prefer definitely having more the freedom. I think one thing that really inspires me in the US is the entrepreneurial culture. That this is so connected in the core of the US, that there's so many people that is really trying their best to start a business. They know this is the way to survive, and some people make a big business, have big investments, and you see the Bay Area, like San Francisco and around, how much money there is there, how many investments that have been made over the years, and also that California is the 5th largest economy in the world, just California, and that says something about all the capital, all the investments that have been made here. And I think it's such a big inspiration to be in an environment where people are willing to take risk, and there's the entrepreneur spirit, people are working hard, people are willing to sacrifice things to make a real difference in life and not just go the easy way. And that's really something that is so much in the core of the US. And of course, it's not going to be every single person you see there. There's also going to be a lot of people that doesn't work hard, that just want an easy job. But a lot of people have this fighter spirit in them, which is not the same in Europe. So this is really something I've seen over the last 2 years. I knew about this already before, but really it is something I see really people really fight and hustle their way. I had that spirit because, again, I also think if you don't make any money or if you don't have any success, there's not really going to be anyone to help you. And for that reason, people know they need to fight. They need to survive. And this is something I really admire a lot and something that really drives me a lot living in the US. The next one is that both Europeans and Americans are great people. Especially Americans, I feel, is being portrayed as these crazy people, that they're like crazy like Trump and things like that. But in the end, the majority of the people in the US are friendly people, they are open people, would help you if you're in trouble. And I feel this is something that is misunderstood. I knew this before moving, but in general, I feel there's a lot of people that have this misconception of what Americans really are. And of course, there's a big difference from people living in LA to Texas to New York to Miami or whatever other places. There's a big difference, but generally speaking, I would say that both the Europeans and the Americans are great people, and what you see in TV has nothing to do with the normal life people have. And it's the same, I guess Americans would also sometimes have this idea of what an Italian is, but there's also a lot of Italians that is not only eating pasta or whatever, or French people not only eating croissants, and all these stereotypes. And it's the same with Americans. People are not like Trump. People are hardworking people with good intentions, a good heart, friendly and all that. And I think that it's just important to say, being a European, that I know the Europeans are in a certain way and the Americans, and what really the real learnings with this is when you meet them in person, and nothing to do with the news you hear and all these crazy opinions and people and all that stuff. Also, I wanted to include some more easier subjects. Americans doesn't really have that good a style, whether it's the clothes or in general, just like they don't have that same feel as Europeans have. I think we managed to have a better feel for this. So that's like one thing that I knew this before, but I would still say when I see the daily life, there's a lot of people that doesn't really have that great a style. And the same goes also with architecture and interior design, where people just like, sometimes they have like a massive furniture or the wrong colors. I don't know why they're so obsessed with this dark wood look also sometimes. Like things where Europeans just like don't understand what's going on. Also, I would say that the food in Europe is better, though I would say the American breakfast is my favorite of different types of breakfast, but generally speaking, food is better in Europe. It is better ingredients, it's more fresh. There's also more restrictions on what kind of things you cannot put in the food and things like that. So this was my learnings after 2 years of living in the US. I hope you found it useful, and feel free to drop some comments if you feel that there is something I forgot or maybe you disagree. Drop a comment, let me know what you think. Maybe you see things completely different. Maybe I generalize too much. This is just my experience as a Danish person moving to the US, and for sure both places have amazing things, whether it is Denmark or any other country in Europe, but also the US have so many amazing things to offer. So that's my overall conclusion. Also, can you do me a big favor and hit the like and subscribe button? That would help me so much make more content like this and share more of my experiences and learnings.